And we're live. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, I'm back with professional angler Randy Blaukat, and we're going to be talking about the differences between natural lakes up north and down south in Florida versus your traditional southern reservoirs. And I spend a lot of time talking about my YouTube videos and where the majority of bass fishing tournaments are held, especially on the Bassmaster Lake Series and FLW Tour. And one thing we're really going to talk about is how to find fish when you don't have creek channels. I talk about creek channels all the time in my videos. It's not something that you guys may have on your natural lakes up north or down in Florida. And it should be a really interesting topic. We get a lot of requests for this on a lot of different videos. And so I'm excited to talk about this with Randy today. So Randy, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing good, Johnny. How's everything going there?
It has been okay. For those of you who don't know, on my YouTube channel, I've just got married recently and also moved into a new house. You can see behind me I still don't have my office set up, and it's been kind of crazy. So if you haven't seen me posting YouTube videos recently, don't worry. I haven't just switched to the live stream format here with Randy. I will be making more instructional YouTube videos on the water, about electronics, all that stuff. It's just getting married and moving a new house is a lot more time consuming than I thought it would be. But how has everything been going with you, Randy?
Oh man, it's been really busy here. It's just, here in Southwest Missouri, it just won't stop raining. I mean, we literally, I bet the last 2 weeks it has rained like probably 95% of the time as far as the days go. And I've been fishing, quite a bit when I can get out in between all that. Grand Lake, Stockton, Table Rock. It's been a really good time to practice your skills on high water fishing because all of our lakes are anywhere between 5 to 15 feet over normal right now.
Yeah, it's really crazy. It's the same. I'm in the same area, and it's like, I think Table Rock's going to be a record high, right? Maybe this week it'll be like 17, 18 feet above normal pool.
Yeah, they've had so many record years the last 5 years as for water level down there. And it's just crazy right now. I mean, it looks just like a completely different lake. It's neat though. I mean, it's you don't see this like this a lot, and it gives you some opportunities to fish things that just never exist. They're just like capitalizing on the moment, the opportunity at the time. So it's pretty fun to fish down there right now, anyway.
Yeah, do you have any tips just real quick for those guys who are dealing with these high water conditions before we jump into the natural lake stuff?
Oh, definitely. So a lot of it, when you're dealing with high water, it has to do with your water visibility and actually how high the water is. And for example, like at Table Rock right now, the water is super high, but it's still fairly clean. It didn't get muddy. And what happens when you get a super fast rise like a Table Rock, those fish, they want to be shallow, but they want to be in some more open areas. They don't like to be like in that super thick, deep, gnarly stuff a lot. So this is a great time if you can catch them in people's yards, you can catch them in parks, just in any type of places that you can get to the bank. That's the big key when it gets really high is you got to get to the bank more than anything else. And those will be those flatter, sort of manicured type lawn areas.
Yeah, a lot of times it's tough to even just get to the bank. And so if you try to go into like a normal stretch of trees, there's no way you can even get there. You have to find a lawn or a state park or something just to be able to get to the shoreline.
Right, and everybody needs to remember when the water comes up real high, any time of the year, there's always two different populations of bass. There are those fish that will move up with that rising water, and then there's another population of fish that just sort of stay put in that deeper water. And it's really interesting to see how that plays out because it just goes to show you that bass are individuals, and there's not one group of fish doing the same thing everywhere on the lake. There's a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get those situations because, like, on those high water situations, like you said, you can fish the old bank line before the lake was flooded. A lot of times, right where the old shoreline was, will be 15 feet of water. So you can go, a lot of times, what I'll do is fish offshore with a crankbait, a jig, a 10-inch worm out off the bank when a lot of guys are up shallow throwing a frog or a buzzbait or a topwater or flipping bushes, and they're just as productive patterns. It's just a lot of guys get sucked into that shallow water. And so I'm actually excited. Randy and I are going to go out next week on Table Rock, and we're going to do a kind of one-on-one challenge a little bit. Not like super competitive, but the idea is to maybe have Randy go fish up the shallow bushes, go home fishing in people's yards. Now I'm going to go fish the old bank line or maybe some of the further offshore areas and show you how I would use my electronics to find fish, and Randy how he uses his 30 years of fishing experience to go find them as well. And I think that it'll be a really cool, like, kind of new versus old styles of fishing, but also just showing that you can catch fish in so many different ways when you get to the lake. It's not just a cookie cutter, one size fits all, and that's never fishing, is it, Randy?
No, it's never. There's no rules in bass fishing. It's all abstract, and there's things that unfold all the time that make even people like myself that have been doing it a long time say, "God, still have so much to learn in this sport."
For sure. And guys, I see you over here in the live stream making lots of comments about how the wife has locked me down now. I can't go fishing. Also, she's got my hair set up nice. I've done my hair for a while, but yes, living married life is awesome. I really enjoy it, but mainly it's not that she's holding me back. It's just there's so many things to do with setting up the lawn, trying to get sod in the backyard, trying to get all the new bills set up. Just you guys know the story, but I'm going to be out actually fishing all weekend, Randy, on Table Rock, doing some kayak fishing with Chad Hoover. And I don't know if some of you guys who are listening to the podcast or live stream know who Chad Hoover is, but he is one of the top kayak YouTubers out there, and he's going to hook me up with a kayak, and I'm going to start doing some of that fishing. And it's going to be really interesting to kind of adjust from being in a boat, be able to run all around the lake, to sitting in a kayak and trying to fish offshore, getting blown around by the wind. I think it's going to be really fascinating, and I think I'll learn a lot as well. Yeah. One thing that's really interesting that Chad told me that I want to get your opinion on, Randy, is that when he goes kayak fishing, he says that he'll motor over a spot. He actually has a motor on his kayak. And when he motors over a group of fish offshore, sometimes you'll see 5 to 8 fish on his graph. And then he'll come back over them 20 minutes later with a paddle, and he'll see 30 to 40 fish on the graph. And it's almost like when he's motoring with the kayak, that motor will scatter those fish. But when he paddles over them really softly, he'll see more fish under the graph just because they don't scatter. So I'm super interested to see if that works. Have you heard anything like that before?
Oh, there's a lot to be said for stealth. A quick story. One of the most incredible trips I ever went on, I went to the Quetico Wilderness area with Rick Clunn and Jerry McInnes, sort of on a vacation about 15 years ago. And we portaged and canoed way back into the wilderness area in these untouched areas in the boundary waters up there. And the first, when you're so used to fishing in a bass boat, when you get into canoe, it's really awkward. It's tippy, it blows real quick. You can't have exact positioning, but you can catch so many more fish out just because of the stealth element. And, bass are smart. I mean, they're in tune with their environment. And when they hear something that's artificial, they react to it. So it's definitely a more purest way to fish.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. I'm excited about it. I'm going to probably tip my kayak. I'm going to lose some fishing rods. I feel like a lot's going to happen. We're going to have some fish the moment bloopers of me just in a kayak for the first week. My arms are going to be sore, but it'll be fun. But anyways, enough talk about the kayak fishing and all that. Let's jump into the topic that I know so many guys have been just begging for on this channel, and that's talking about the difference between the natural lakes and the reservoirs. And so start us off, Randy, here by kind of giving your opinion on how a southern reservoir, let's say like a Lake Stockton or a Table Rock Lake, is different from a natural lake, like maybe a Kissimmee Lake in Florida, or maybe like a Cayuga Lake up north, New York, things like that.
Well, the first difference on that, Johnny, is you're not going to have the natural features in a man-made lake, such as like creek channels, ditches, stuff that basically exists before the lake was impounded. Natural lakes tend to be shallower, not all the time shallower, but they tend to be more bowl-oriented. The cover tends to be uniform in it, and you're dealing more with like humps and natural ridges and that type of stuff, and particularly big flats. I mean, flats are really key in a natural lake, whether you're in Florida or if you're up north or wherever. It's one of the top structures on a lake. And it's the same in man-made lakes a little bit too, but it's a different type of fishing. But the biggest thing for most people that have never been to a natural lake is just the absence of the man-made creek channels, lack of siltation, lack of man-made type structures. And that was for me. Growing up here in Missouri, I fished man-made lakes my whole life. And when I first went out on the circuit, the lakes that I had the toughest time with were those natural lakes because there was a learning curve that went with that that just takes time. I mean, it's a lot quicker now with, all the information and YouTube information, but when you try to adapt from a natural lake, I mean, a man-made lake to a natural lake, it takes some adjustments.
Yeah, it's just really interesting because I actually had the opposite experience. I grew up in Wisconsin fishing natural lakes. And so coming down south, half my life has been spent in Wisconsin fishing, half my life has been spent in Arkansas fishing. So I'm very comfortable switching between them, but it's definitely not something that comes naturally to some fishermen. And I do want to pull up some graphics here, Randy, and kind of show you, show the viewers some differences in the types of lakes and what they look like, and kind of what you're talking about in terms of creek channels and the flatter banks, the humps, stuff like that. And so what Randy's kind of talking about here, guys, is, for example, here's Table Rock Lake. Now, Table Rock Lake, you have really deep water, let's say 67 or 150, 160 feet of water, and in the middle of the creeks, you might have 70, 80 feet of water. And this is similar to a lot of lakes, even in North Carolina, if you have like a Lake Wylie, a Lake Norman, places like that. And all of these little creek arms and little offshoots are fed by creeks that used to be in the lake, and they form these things called creek channels. And I talk about in my videos all the time how these bass follow these creek channels back into the creeks, and the shad migrate through them, bass migrate through them. And not every single lake in the country has super deep creek channels, but there are creek channels even on like some of these river system lakes where you can see this very defined creek channel that's 30 feet deep on Lake Dardanelle here that runs through the lake. And it forms ledges and humps and channel swing banks and all these things that I talk about all the time that help me find fish. Well, if you go to a natural lake, and an example I'm going to use is one of my home lakes up here in Wisconsin, which is going to be it's called Big Green Lake, and we'll talk about a couple different lakes. You'll see here, this lake is literally just a giant bowl. It's like just this giant bowl with no contour lines. And some of them are super deep. They have, 100 feet of water in the middle, and they come up to these really basically featureless flat areas. There's a hard drop there, but there's these featureless flats. And then there's other lakes that are just literal bowls like this with no creek channels. This is a Little Green Lake. I used to fish all the time, and this looks like a lot of Florida lakes. And what Randy's talking about in terms of where these fish are setting up are humps, which is kind of like this area right here. And a hump is basically a place where you have harder bottom areas, and those harder bottom areas are going to attract your forage. And that's where you might have grass or rock or holes in the grass, things like that. And can you elaborate a little bit more on like the forage and how that's different between the reservoirs and the natural lakes, Randy?
Yeah, depending upon where you're at, whether it be like for example, up north, I mean, you have a lot of the bass feed on perch up there. Gobies are a big thing. I think a lot of people have heard about the goby populations, and obviously crawfish are a big factor too. And there's different species of minnows. And like in Florida, when you go there, you're dealing with a lot of shiners down there. But in man-made impoundments, you're dealing more with the gizzard shad, the threadfin shad populations, some blueback herrings in the southeast lakes. So it's just basically different species of bait fish, although all over the country in man-made lakes or natural lakes, perch is a prime forage. The northern lakes and even some of the southern lakes, a lot of the bass feed on the yellow perch up there. Down here in the central southern part of the country, you're dealing with more bluegills, black perch, even white bass feed on crappie. But like I said, it's sort of unique to the geographical area that they're in. The great when we're talking about man-made lakes, a lot of people initially it comes into mind like the Great Lakes, Lake Champlain, Lake St. Clair, Minnetonka, that type of stuff. That's where you're dealing a lot with gobies and yellow perch as primary forage. Now, if you're dealing with some of the lakes like you fished in Wisconsin, a lot of the smaller ones that I'm not familiar with, I'm assuming what are they there, Johnny? What's the main forage in the smaller lakes?
It's really yellow perch is huge. So it's yellow perch. We do have some golden shiners as well, but usually it's those yellow perch that are really big. And the perch are interesting because they feed in and they live in different areas than a shad would normally live. They like to live in the middle of big grass beds on humps or around rocky spots. And a lot of times they'll just be over 30, 40, 50 foot of water in the middle of the lake, and then sometimes they'll pull up on these big, massive flats. And so for people who are used to fishing shad or have shad in their fishery and have a lot of crawfish, the types of areas where you find perch are very different. But at the same time, for those of you who are really familiar with fishing for areas with perch and gobies, going down south, the fish act very different because their primary forage is shad and crawfish. And so really I find the two main differences between your natural lakes and your southern reservoirs isn't actually the contour line difference. So the creek channels versus the flat lakes. It's the actual forage itself, which is gobies and perch and maybe some sunfish versus your shad, gizzard shad, blueback herring, things like that, and your crawfish. And there are crawfish in some of the rivers and stuff up north, and you can have some of those golden shiners and different types of shad up north, but this is kind of just talking in generalities. And the other thing is all the grass. The grass is a huge game changer. And I know, Randy, you've talked about this with me before, but you said you maybe struggled a little bit going up and fishing all those grass lakes, especially when you came from Lake Stockton and Table Rock Lake, where it's literally just a rock hole. Can you explain or can you maybe give some examples of how you adapted from fishing the southern rocky lakes to those grassy lakes up north?
The southern lakes or the
northern lakes.
Sorry,
the northern lakes with grass, like a Champlain or Minnetonka, places like that.
Yeah, there are a few similarities, but there's a lot of differences in how you approach it. I remember the first time I went to Lake Champlain. This was back in the early '90s, before the lake was even really famous. That famous, and in that particular tournament, you always look for areas that are familiar to you, as far as because you caught bass in those type of areas before. And I got onto one area up on the northern part of Lake Champlain that looked a lot like some of the areas I fished at Table Rock, some of the big rock, flatter areas, boulder type stuff, in that 4 to 8 foot zone. And, just started catching them immediately, once I got into that same type of area. But the difference that you have in that, as far as the grasses go, I mean, the grasses are so different as far as, where you go up north. I mean, a lot of the grass that you're talking about fishing up north is not like the big grass beds like on the TVA lakes or something. They're more that isolated stocky type grass that grows in real clear water in that, 8 to 12 foot zone. And the key on northern lakes up there, it's not necessarily the grass, but it's that mix of grass and rock together. Mm-hmm. It's the mix of grass and rock. It's the mix of grass and gravel, grass and sand. And the fish like that diversity and cover. I mean, and once you can find an area up north where you have that mix, that good mix of grass, rock, those are the sweet spots for sure. Not that they won't just get on bare rock, because they get on it a lot. But if you can have that grass present, that's when you can get a mixed bag of largemouth and smallmouth both, because most of those lakes up there do have a mixed bag of fish in the northern areas.
Yeah, that rock, finding that rock for me was always key up in Wisconsin, where we had those, like you said, grass out in 8 to 12 foot with stalks everywhere. And what we would always look for, I'm going to pull up my my Navionics here again. What I was always looking for on these shallow, this is actually Lake Cayuga up in New York, but this is kind of the upper end of Cayuga in some of the real kind of flat, shallow areas. The key you're looking for, at least what I look for when I'm trying to find these fish on these grassy lakes, is I'm looking at my contour line map and I'm trying to find what I call thumbs. And it's kind of weird, but basically if you look like right here on the map, you can see that there's a contour line section where the contour line goes straight, and then it forms this little thumb that sticks out from the map, and then it goes back to being a straight line. Anytime you find one of these thumbs, or if you find one of these areas right here where you have this circle, where there's just a random circle in the middle of a big open blue space, that's going to be a high spot. And these thumbs and high spots are usually areas where there's some sort of rock or harder bottom that wasn't eroded away by the wind and the waves and the glaciers over time. And so all the surrounding area might be sand or some sort of other softer bottom, but those high spots, those hard spots, are going to hold rock. The rock is going to attract perch, which is what the bass feed on, and therefore the bass are going to be there feeding on the perch. And so that's what I always looked for on these natural lakes. And it doesn't matter what part of the lake you go to. I'm going to run down here to a lower section of Cayuga. Same things I'm looking for. You have these little high spots here. And you can see the depth changes on these areas are not very drastic. You have a depth change from maybe 11 foot down to 16 feet. It's not like on these southern lakes where we fish, on Lake Stockton or whatever, you're looking for a drop from 8 to 25 feet or 8 to 40 feet, and it's a sharp break. That's not what you're really looking for. The areas you're really focused on more than anything are these little small high spots that you can kind of barely see from the map, but it's these areas where you get this little bit harder bottom. Is that what you look for as well, Randy, when you're on the lake?
Yeah, I'm going to pull up, Johnny, can you pull up the Lake Champlain map? I'm going
Yeah,
to show
I got
on
it.
there. Let me know when you see the screen where I'm at.
Yeah, and Randy, also, if you go over on your screen and go over to the, there's a button in the bottom. This is a good tip for everyone. If you go to that bottom right or bottom left corner, you'll see that little button that has the Navionics symbol. If you click
Right.
that, and then you click on, just click that right there, and then go to sonar charts. That's going to give you a lot more detailed map on Champlain, and you can actually see
Okay.
those contour lines better. So that's something that I know a lot of people don't know about actually on these Navionics maps. And so if you do want to get some more detailed maps, click on that little button there, and then change the show sonar charts. It makes it way more detailed.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, the area that I'm showing right here, this is a prime example of what to look for on these northern lakes when you go there. I'm going to click back on the other one because it shows the depths a little bit better on
Mm-hmm.
it. Okay, you can see that there. Now, this is that area I was telling you about where I just absolutely smoked them the first time I was up at Lake Champlain. And this right here is typical of all northern lakes, whether it be St. Clair, the Great Lakes, Champlain, whatever. You got these big flats that are like 2 to 5 foot deep close to the bank, and there's no drop off really on them. They just extend out into the lake into like 12, 13 foot of water. Once you get more towards the channel out here, you're getting in that 17, 20 foot of water, and you've got some humps and ridges, that stuff. But right here on this 4 to 8 foot contour is a key area on any natural lake during this time of the year in the summertime because you have a mix of the rock and the boulders on this. Now they'll extend out into the deeper water too, but this whole contour line right here where you can see me drawing around is one of the things you really need to look for in summertime northern fishing because this is the type of area those big smallmouth will use that aren't in the deeper water because just like any other place we're talking about, you've got these fish that'll be using like say for example this reef right here that drops off into deeper water. You may have fish using the drop here in 20 foot of water, and then you may have 4 pounders cruising the splat here hanging out in the mixed grass and rock. So that's one of the things you really have to learn when you're fishing natural waters is how to bounce back between these flats and the structure places, the deeper humps, because they live in both all summer.
And what makes you choose one or the other? Like, let's say you're getting to the lake, Randy, and you're trying to go out and catch some fish or prepare for a tournament on Champlain. What makes you choose to fish one or the other? Or do you always try both in the given fishing day, or do you narrow it down in practice where you find they're only on one in a certain time of the year?
Well, I prefer to fish shallow because I'll show you, for example, we'll go over here, and you can see, let me zoom in here a little bit here. Let's try to find this. I'm going to show you a spot that I caught him deep real good. This particular ridge right here, you see this right here?
Yep.
Out on the edge of this one time, where it starts to drop off deeper, I started catching them really good, schooled up on a Carolina rig, just out, in this 10 foot where it started dropping off into this 15 to 16. And all the fish were like clone 3 pounders, but you could catch like 30 or 40 of them. Then I could come over here on the flat that I'm talking about, and you didn't get near the bites, and they were isolated rogue fish, but they were bigger ones. They were those 3.5 to 4 pounders, and that's what I look for when I'm fishing northern lakes. I'm not real big on fishing the structure type places. I'm more about getting on these big flats and covering a tremendous amount of water and going after those big isolated rogue smallmouth. And it's here again, it's just a matter of preference. People do well either way up there, but that's just the way that it's been successful to me um, over the years. I mean, that's just the way I like to fish up there.
And are you looking for like isolated patches of grass and rock out there, like visually, or are you graphing these areas before you fish them? How do you find those little rogue smallmouth?
Well, most of the time, like I'll use this for an example right here, and I'll go to Lake St. Clair here in a little bit and show you some places. But like this flat right here, you may be, and you can see the bottom. I mean, even like in 12 and 15 feet of water, and you can in most of the Great Lakes. But you'll be coming along through here, and all of a sudden you'll see like a stalk of grass, like maybe every 5 or 6 feet away from each other, and the grass may extend for 100 yards. It's not thick, it's just something here and something there. And then you look down there and there may be an occasional boulder that it's like as big around as a trash can lid or even as big around as a car hood. And once you roll over those places, that's a lot of times where you'll get those bigger smallmouth, because some of the other places are more not much grass, a little bit flatter bottom, more sand. And another thing that you'll find out is when you're fishing these northern lakes like this on these big flats, they really key in on the exact depth of the water, because sometimes they're in that 5 and 6 foot of water, sometimes they're out over this 8 and 10 foot of water, and you're using the same technique. I'll use a jerk bait or spinner bait in this 10 and 12 foot zone, the same as I will in this 2 foot zone. And we had an FLW tournament up there several years ago, and I was leading the tournament I was leading it the second, third day of the tournament, going into the last day. And I was throwing a Megabass 110 out over this deeper water here, like some of the 15 and 20 foot water. And everybody else was catching them spawning, up shallow in that particular tournament. Scott Martin eventually won that tournament. I think I got third in it after the last day. But there were two groups of fish. You could go up here on the bank right here, and you could see bed and smallmouth all over the place. Yet there were also fish out here suspended in that, 15, 20 foot of water, which is typical in summertime smallmouth fishing. You got two groups of fish.
How are you catching those suspended smallmouth out there in the middle? Were you like swim baiting them, drop shotting them?
No, I was catching them all on a Megabass 110 jerk bait, and awesome. The water visibility, you got 10 to 12 foot of visibility. So when you're fishing that jerk bait over 20 foot of water, it's nothing for them to come up 10 feet. I mean, because they can see it, so well. And a lot of those fish, stay, all those smallmouth that stay deeper around the structure, they also get deep just out on the flat, and they roam these big flats, even in the deeper water. And that's one of the big things that I like to do in northern lakes that a lot of people don't do. And Clark Wendlett's another person. He likes to fish the same way. We'll get out over in the deep water flats, not on hard structure like this island here, but just the vast flats that have nothing distinguished about them, and just cover water with a spinner bait or a crankbait or a jerk bait. And you're going after those bigger rogue smallmouth that don't necessarily school up, but when you get one, it's a good one.
Dude, that's just fascinating to me. I'm not a smallmouth expert by any means, especially a northern smallmouth expert. And most of my videos, when I'm talking about fishing, it's always looking for a drop off or a hump or a ledge or something those fish are related to. But like if you look at the map here, yeah, you have a small little drop. You can see the edge of that flat, but it's not like you're finding a 7, 8, 9 foot depth change, or you're not looking for giant cover areas. It's just literally subtle, tiny little areas, and then just covering water to find them.
Subtle things. And let's go over here to Lake St. Clair, and I'll show you another example of what we're talking about here. Even in Erie, I've done this in Erie, I've done it in Lake Ontario, St. Clair. I mean, it works all over the place. But here's an example on St. Clair, which is very similar to Champlain, where I've caught giant small bags of smallmouth. Okay, this particular area here, we had an FLW tournament here. I guess it was 2 years ago up here. And I wound up catching, I caught 17 something the first day, close to 18, and I caught 20 pounds the second day. And all of these fish, if you look at this particular map through here, you look at that and you say, there's nothing out there. It's like, what is there out there that holds those fish? And I wound up catching those fish on a Megabass 110 Magnum jerkbait out on this 10-foot flat all the way out through here. And the only way that you can find those fish on these northern lakes a lot of times is fishing through an area. For example, I may run in here and I'll make a pass down through here. I may catch a couple 2.5 pounders. I'll move out to that 6 to 8 foot zone, make another drift through there, see what's happening there. And then I'll make a drift out through this deeper water because all of it's pretty uniform. You've got bigger boulder rocks on all these northern lakes closer to the bank, and almost without exception, as you get further off the bank here, it turns into more sand, gravel, and a little bit of the scattered grass. And in that particular tournament, I found these big smallmouth just out on these vast flats, drifting them, covering water with the wind. You get a bite once every 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but it'd be a 4 pounder. And you could go up here on the shallow areas up here and you could catch a bunch of 2.5s. So this is one of the things that's different, and it's sort of frustrating to people that don't fish the northern lakes for smallmouth, is they're looking for structure, like they want to like fish around this hump right here, or they're looking, like you said, for some type of break or some type of structure to hold the fish. And one of the biggest keys I can give people in fishing northern natural lakes is get out on these big giant flats and just cover water. And the way that you do that, you first of all, you say, well, how do I know where to start? And you don't. All you have to do is you have to focus on the depth, and you get out there and you make a 20-minute drift. If you don't catch one, move out a little bit further, make another 20-minute drift. And if those fish are there, they'll tell you real quick, because they're northern smallmouth in the summertime are really aggressive. You can catch them power fishing. And like I said, in this tournament, I caught them on a jerk bait, but you could also catch them on a Ned rig, crankbait, spy bait, whatever you wanted to throw, tube, anything.
And can you explain a little bit more about drifting, Randy? Because I've never really drifted for smallmouth before. What's that process like?
Yeah, you just about have to, when you're fishing the northern lakes, like the Great Lakes, like Erie, Ontario, Champlain, a lot of times, St. Clair, these lakes out here, even on a 10 to 15 mile an hour wind, they're so big and there's so much wave direction that you have to drift across these flats, because the waves out there really get too big for you to fish into the wind. And it's been my experience on northern smallmouth that you never want to fish into the wind, because you can't cover enough water, you spook the fish, and you can't make a long enough cast. The big key on these northern smallmouth, clearwater smallmouth, is you got to make super, super long casts to catch the big ones. That's the whole key to catching those 4-pound class smallmouth, is they always hit at the end of the cast, at the end of your longest cast. And by drifting with that, you can make a longer cast with the wind. You can cover more water. And say, for example, if I'm fishing this 10-foot contour and I catch one right here, I'll very rarely will I like turn it around and try to fish into the wind. Most of the time, if I catch one, I'll keep drifting until they stop biting, and then I'll come back up and make another drift with the wind, whatever the direction the wind's coming in. And that's what you do all day long. And that's why a lot of people use drift socks. They use the paddles on the end of their power poles to slow them down a little bit. But you have got to drift through areas on these flats to really maximize your chances of catching those really giant smallmouth.
Gotcha. That's super, super interesting. And so with these smallmouth, then, these smallmouth fisheries, obviously they set up very different from your northern largemouth fisheries. So can you get into maybe some of your experience fishing, like, for example, like a Lake Minnetonka over in Minnesota, how those northern largemouth fisheries, or even like the southern end, like Ticonderoga, places like that, where you're fishing for largemouth as opposed to fishing for the smallmouth?
Right. Let's go back over to Champlain here, because Champlain is the reason I like using it as an example is that it's so reproducible in other northern fisheries. Whether you're at a place like Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire or Minnetonka or wherever, but it's got a lot of good different things. let's look at two areas on Lake Champlain that are known for largemouth. The first one is Missisquoi Bay right here. There's been a ton of tournaments won right here in Missisquoi Bay, big tournaments. I mean, a lot of FLW tournaments, a lot of Bassmaster Elite Series, and the thing that distinguishes Missisquoi Bay from this particular, here's the other area we were just talking about, the flat, where I almost won the FLW tournament. Once you get over like in Missisquoi Bay, this area's got a little bit more stained water. It's got flatter banks, and it's got a lot of reeds and shallow submergent grass in it. And that's one of the things that you have to look for when you're dealing with largemouth is grass or hard cover with stained water is going to be the key there, where they don't have that option to go out offshore, and the offshore structures just aren't as conducive to holding those fish. So, for example, if you go back to Lake Champlain right here, like this particular bank right through here is like lined with buggy whips. It looks very similar to Florida. When you're up in these sloughs and channels that go back in here, there's lay down wood, that type of stuff, and it just looks really good for largemouth. Dollar pads back in here, maybe some lily pads, but it's just shallower, flatter. Now, if we go to the other area of Lake Champlain, which is the completely opposite end, down by the Ticonderoga area, this is the other most famous area on Champlain. This is the Ticonderoga area, and it's the same thing. You have a lot of willow trees on the bank. You have some buggy whips. You have emergent grass. You have a lot of riprap. You've got water visibility that's in that 2 to 4 foot range versus like 10 to 12 up on the northern part of the lake. And overall, the lake is a lot flatter with a lot shallower cover, all the way up through here. It's the same deal. You got flatter banks, just shallow cover. So basically what we're talking about, Johnny, is when you're looking for largemouth in northern lakes, you have to get to the extremities where it flattens out a little bit, and you've got a little bit dirtier water, and you've got more of that shallow emergent and submergent cover.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's just interesting because like even Lake Champlain, there's some guys over here in the chat who asked a question. He was actually Hugh. He asks, does everything you guys are talking about apply to the smaller northern lakes that you have club tournaments on? And I think that he's referring a little bit more towards kind of the lakes that I grew up fishing. So actually, I'm going to start sharing my screen here a little bit, Randy, just to kind of show these guys a little bit of like these, the fisheries we're talking about, these giant St. Clair, Champlain, places like that. But the lakes I grew up on, Wisconsin and like over Minnesota, are very different from these in terms of what the fish are doing. So I'm going to switch over here and just kind of show you what a lake that I'm very familiar with fishing kind of looks like and what I do out here. So this is Little Green Lake in Wisconsin. It is a tiny little fishery and it is loaded with good fish. And there's a bunch of these lakes around here. There's Big Green Lake, there's Puckaway, Lake Monticello. A lot of guys who are in Wisconsin are probably loving this right now because they're like, I know, I fish all these lakes. Basically, Little Green Lake is a good example of a fishery where basically it's a giant grassy bowl. And it doesn't have smallmouth, it has largemouth. And there isn't really that difference, kind of like you were talking about with Missisquoi Bay and down Ticonderoga, where there's those differences in water clarity and all this stuff. The whole lake is, you can see across it. And there's so many lakes like this up in New York, over in Minnesota, Illinois. They're just everywhere. I do breakdowns for guys all the time on these lakes. And what I am always looking for on these types of fisheries, well, first, these fisheries have grass. And so what you're going to want to do on these fisheries is you want to get off the bank a little bit most of the year and try to find fish that are on the inside or the outside grass line. And grass line fishing is like really important on a lot of these fisheries. You're fishing the outside grass line, inside grass line. And grass fishing is really key on a lot of these natural lakes. It also works on lakes in Florida, Kissimmee Chain, on a lot of those like Lake Toho. There's a lot of grass line fishing. And the big keys on grass fishing I found up north when I used to fish up there all the time is that these fish get in tiny little areas in these grass beds. You'll find a stretch of grass, let's say, right here off of this random flat section where you'll have a size of a spot the size of the front deck of your boat, and you can catch 30 fish flipping a grass stretch that's the size of, again, the front deck of your boat, and you catch 30 fish there. And the reason those fish are there is usually because there's some sort of harder bottom, rocky bottom that is in that grass. And this is the type of fishing that I love to do. And one thing that I'm always looking for, guys, when I'm trying to do this, I'm actually going to show you a recording here of my sonar, because there's something I look for up north specifically that I don't talk about a lot in my YouTube videos, just because it's not that applicable where I am, because there's hard bottom everywhere on the lakes I'm fishing. I mean, we're fishing Lake Stockton, Missouri, Table Rock. It's just all rock. That's all there is. But let me pull up my my screen here. I just want to show you what I'm looking at here. So right here is a image from my 2D sonar, and this is something that works not only here, it works on up north, it works down south as well. But what I have here is an old school trick. Before there was down imaging, before there was side imaging, it's with your traditional 2D sonar. You can do this with basically a unit from as far back as like 2005, 2004. You can do it with color units, black and white units, it doesn't matter. And what it is a double return. Have you heard about this trick before, Andy, where you double or triple the distance on your 2D sonar, and then you get this double ping?
No, I'm ready to learn something.
Okay, so this is like something I've been doing back since I was like 9 years old. This is like a trick. And so what you do is you set your fish finder to triple the distance of the bottom. So if you're graphing in, let's say, 20 feet of water, you want to set it to 60 feet. If you're graphing in 10 foot of water, you want to set it to 30 feet. And then you want to crank up your sensitivity and look for underneath your graph where you have this double return. So you'll see right here that you have this bottom of the lake right here, you have the red and the yellows, then you have this white space here. And all of a sudden below there you get that extra green blob. Right where you have the extra green blob is going to be where your hard bottom is. And so everywhere it's white is soft bottom, everywhere it's green on that double ping, that double return, is your hard bottom. And when you're graphing on grass lakes, this is a bunch of grass through here. A lot of times you can't tell the bottom composition very well because that grass will interfere with the sonar. But what I would do is, especially when that grass wasn't topped out to the surface, is graph around these lakes, even like right when the ice melts. Graph around these lakes looking for that double return on my fish finder. And every time you found one, we would drop back then we would drop a pill bottle or like a marker buoy, and we would triangulate and all that stuff. We didn't have GPS, and we'd find that little stretch. And then you would have your just little subtle grass spot out in the middle where you have that rock, and that hard bottom was usually some sort of boulder or harder bottom. And later in the year, in the summertime, those bass then would position on those little hard spots. And sometimes they would be, just randomly down in the 100 yards off the bank or 50 yards off the bank in the middle of this grass field. And we didn't know what they were before, but now with the contour line mapping, a lot of times there were these little humps on your fish, on your navionics, where you have those little bump outs I was talking about, those thumbs, little tiny points and stuff like that. That's what they are. So a lot of times you can find them with your navionics, but a lot of times these tiny lakes don't have good navionics mapping on them. So what you all do is just graph from like 5 foot out to 20 foot or 15 foot and just make big loops around this lake looking for that double ping. Every time you find it, you find hard bottom and you find a bunch of big fish. And so that's what we used to do, going way back to when I was fishing the Fishers of Men series when I was like 11 years old up in Wisconsin, and I think we got third place in Angler of the Year. Me and my fishing partner, he was like 35, I was like 11, and I was loving it. I was loving fishing. But that's what we used to do. Have you ever, do you have any similar stories on lakes, any lakes like this, or small little grassy lakes like this at all, Randy?
I fished. Let's see if we can pull it up on the map here. I fished over there at the where they had the Olympics over there, the Saranac chain of lakes. Let's see if we can find that in New York. Up there by Lake Placid in New York. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick.
Yeah.
It's just west of Lake Champlain up there, about an hour. And I'll give you some examples of what we got up there.
Oh, it looks like I lost your screen here, Randy. 1 second. I'm seeing double me.
It's similar to what you're talking about here, Johnny, and the fact that these are smaller. They're natural lakes, but they're smaller. And they fish a little bit different than...
Hey, Randy, real quick. It looks like you dropped off one of my calls here. Can you hear me okay?
There's a lot of these, like up in New York, up north. See, just these small little lakes are probably, oh man, I'm going to guess 500 to 1,000 acres. Just these chain of lakes right through here, and they're like little mini Champlains. But it's the same deal when you go up to these particular lakes here. I mean, you're going to have flats on the bank, rocky banks all through here. You're going to have occasional humps out there, that drop off into deeper water. But a lot of what you're looking for in these northern lakes like that is they're unique to every particular lake because you may have, like, say in this neck right here, you may have a bunch of lay down trees that you can catch a few fish on, and then you can move out here onto some of the main bigger lake flats and catch some smallmouth up there. So every northern lake is sort of unique to itself, but one thing always rings true is you got to look for that bigger rock and the grass mixed with that, or just the bigger rock itself on the deeper flat, on the, not deeper, but on the flats that are gradually slope off into 5 to 15 feet of water. And that's always been the big key for me on any of these northern lakes like this is getting out on the big flats looking for the rock. Grass, and grass is really just a bonus. And also, I want to find the clearest water that I can find because a lot of these places, they have like a mix of, well, I'm going to say that most northern fisheries have a mix of like 75% smallmouth and 25% largemouth. And a lot of people go up there and, they don't fish for anything but the largemouth. And they go back in the creeks like this and back in the bays where they can find, some bulrushes and that type of stuff. But very seldom will I do that. I just think that on the northern lakes, it's a lot more fun and you can catch more and bigger fish targeting those smallmouth more on the main lake flats out there.
Hey, Randy, can you hear me okay? Oh, you cannot hear me. That's a problem. Let me...
Oops, did I lose you?
Hey, Randy, can you hear me now?
Oh, I must have lost you there.
You dropped one of the calls. I was trying to talk to you. I'm trying to figure out what's happening here. You can see two of me on the screen. It looks like you dropped from one of the calls. Let me try to get you back in here real quick.
Okay.
Just hold on, everyone, for some technical difficulties. This is our first time we have like 6 different calls going on right now. We may have to... There we go. Okay, I got you back here. So now you're back on the big screen. But that's not what we're wanting. So I'm going to pull up something different here. We got your full face. Okay, we're going to do some on-the-fly technical difficulties. Give me 1 second here, guys. We're doing a lot of work right now. Okay, there we go. Okay, Randy, you're back. We're good to go.
Okay. Did you hear that, what I was saying?
We heard everything. We just could not see anything. So the screen share was not working. It was all really good information, though. And so we are loving that.
Do you have the screen right there?
The screen is no longer there. It looks like you dropped off the one call. If you do want to share your screen, it looks like you dropped off one of the Hangouts. So we may have to go off the cameras for now. Maybe I'll run some screen stuff. For now, I think we got some good information there. We'll work out the kinks, guys. This is our first time doing this, and with him trying to share the screen, Randy sharing the screen, and we're going to be doing these for a long time, hopefully. And so Randy will be joining us weekly, hopefully, as much as he can. And so there's a lot more to come where this is. We're happy.
Yeah. And guys, I am no help with the technical difficulties, just to clarify that. So Johnny's going to have to bail us out on this one.
No problem. Okay, so I have my screen at least, so that's good. And I can share stuff as we're talking, but getting back on track here a little bit, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Randy, in terms of fishing up north, one thing that I'm always trying to talk about in my videos is like baits. And there's a lot of guys that will watch videos on YouTube from guys like Tactical Bassin. Well, those guys fish out in California, so a lot of the baits that they recommend are great for lakes in California and maybe for the south, but not up north. And then I talk about a lot of baits that are good down south, but we don't really hear that much information about really good baits up north. And one thing I want to talk about, not so much about just like fishing a tube, a jerkbait, a spinnerbait. What I want from you is like the juice. Are there any like secret northern baits that guys just don't talk about in YouTube videos, or that maybe guys on the stream haven't heard about, to fish these northern lakes?
Yeah, it's a lot of it depends on the lake that you're fishing again, because if you're talking about like the Wisconsin, Minnesota lakes, that type of northern natural lakes, it's almost like they fish different than those Great Lakes and east. When we're talking about like from Lake Huron over to the East Coast, Winnipesaukee, Champlain, all that type of stuff, it's a little bit different than the Minnesota, Wisconsin type lakes that have a little bit bigger largemouth population. But one of the things that the bait that you cannot overlook when you're fishing northern lakes in the summertime is a drop shot. A drop shot, I mean, there's a lot of other baits that are funner to fish out there, but a drop shot will produce bigger and more fish than about any technique that you can use up there if you have a good smallmouth population. And as far as the juice on the drop shot, it's all about the bait. I mean, a lot of people that fish a drop shot and catch those big bags on the northern lakes, they're wacky rigging like Cincos, bigger baits. They're not using like little, gulp minnows and that type of stuff, or little shads, that type of stuff. They're using, the bigger soft plastics with that. I know a lot of people up there that they like to drop shot a fluke. That's like a big secret up there. So they're using the bigger drop shot baits on a little bit heavier line. One of the big keys, like on Lake St. Clair up there, the last tournament we were at, there was a bunch of guys that did good in that tournament. They were drop shotting a fluke on a bait cast rig with like a half-ounce weight on it, just like an upsized drop shot, power drop shot rig. You can imagine how much water you can cover, with like 10, 12-pound test line on a half-ounce sinker. But that's one of the things that you got to have in your arsenal. Other thing that has just become such a big player up there on all those northern lakes is a Ned rig. If you fish that Ned rig like down here in Missouri, I mean, you'll catch a bunch of small fish. I mean, once in a while you'll catch a good one, but taking a Ned rig up there in those northern smallmouth lakes is one of those baits that you can catch a 4 or 5 pound average. Another big bait up there is a spy bait. A lot of people don't have experience with a spy bait. But a spy bait is really good on any type of northern lake, particularly if you got a day that has a lot of wind on it. They don't bite the spy bait real good just under normal conditions a lot of times. But if you got a really windy day and you've got clear water, or if you've got a cloudy day, those big ones will really hit a spy bait. My personal favorite is jerk bait. And I like the big jerk baits. I like that Megabass 110 Magnum, not the 110, but the 110 Magnum. In that there's something about those northern smallmouth up there. They're a lot older than smallmouth down south. And when you're talking about a 4 or 5 pound northern smallmouth, you're talking about a fish that's probably 8 or 10 years old. And for some reason, those fish, maybe they don't like to feed a whole lot. That's why when they bite, they like a bigger bait. So like that big jerk bait, the upsized drop shots, topwater lure, you can't go wrong with that. A big walking topwater is really good. And one of my all-time favorites is a big chartreuse spinnerbait. Just a big, loud chartreuse spinnerbait with chartreuse blades. I've caught a ton of fish on that up there. So that's my arsenal when I go north 90% of the time. Jerkbait, drop shot, Ned rig, some type of topwater lure, and a spinnerbait. And most of the time, and maybe a tube mixed in that a little bit. But as far as any tips and juice that I can give anyone fishing that is go with those upsized drop shot setups.
Yeah, and I've been just scrolling stuff across the screen on Tackle Warehouse here while you've been talking, Randy. One thing I was talking about before, or I was showing on the screen, I wasn't talking, but I was showing on the screen was one of the key baits all I guys are throwing there, the Strike King 3X Z2. It's a 5-inch jerkbait that actually floats, and I've had these for years. I've been throwing these up in Wisconsin since I was 9 years old. I've had these forever, and they work great on a drop shot, and they're just big profile bait. I used to throw it in, actually I have so many colors of this bait that no one else has because they discontinued it for a while and they brought it back, or maybe it was never gone, but I don't know. But I have like 50 different colors of this bait and they're awesome. But one question we got was, how do you go about drop shotting in the grass, Randy, especially if you're fishing on a grassier lake, and not get it fouled up in the grass all day?
Yeah, that's when you have to go to the Texas rig setup. And I use a Texas rig, and I know that, a lot of the top drop shotters like Aaron Martin's, a lot of the West Coast guys, they prefer a Texas rig over the nose hook most of the time. So what you do is just basically take, it depends on the bait you're throwing. If you're, obviously the bigger the bait, the bigger hook that you're going to have. But for the most part, if I'm drop shotting like a 4-inch trick worm or a 4-inch finesse worm, something like that. I'm using like a straight shanked 1/0 Gamakatsu hook. And one of the big keys when you're drop shot in the Texas rig is you want to skin hook the bait. And what I mean by that is come through like you normally do on a Texas rig, but don't put the hook back through the middle of the worm. Just put it back, just sort of skin hook it on the side of the worm. That way, when you're fishing that lighter 6 and 8 pound test line, that comes right through there immediately. But yeah, just Texas rig the bait, and you'll be fine with that.
Awesome. And I got a couple sneaky baits that I can share with you guys that I've heard about on tour, heard about from friends, or just kind of have tried myself over the years. And so I'll give you guys some other alternatives here. One bait that's super popular is a marabou hair jig, and it's basically these little tiny black jigs. There's these black jigs like this one here, but there's also the pillhead jigs, these little pillhead hand-tied marabou jigs. And this marabou hair, just for whatever reason, is really attractive to those smallmouth. And a lot of guys will go up on flats, they're in real shallow water, and throw this marabou hair jig for those smallmouth and catch a lot of good fish. And it's something that a lot of guys kind of had as a secret for a while, and then it got let out of the bag, but not really let out of the bag. So that marabou hair jig is awesome. And what a lot of guys do is just put a little, like a black trailer on a black jig, and they'll put it on a spinning rod. It only weighs 1/8 of an ounce. It's super, super light, maybe 1/16 of an ounce. And you fire that thing out there and just let it sink really, really slow on dark spots on these big, shallow, sandy flats. Never done this myself, but I've just heard about it as a thing. So maybe another option for you guys that I've heard about. And then, especially when you get to those lakes, I talked before about fishing like on the Little Green Lake. There are those northern lakes that have the grass and they're smaller. And my two favorite baits, you're fishing there, one of those baits you have to have on up north, especially for the largemouth, is just like a Spro topwater frog. You got to be throwing a topwater frog if you're up north around the grass, up shallow water. Spro frogs are awesome. Another bait that I throw a lot is just some sort of subtle flipping bait. And one of my favorites is actually a Strike King Menace grub. And before I fished the Menace grub, what I would throw was just like a sweet beaver, actually an Innovation sweet beaver. And I would flip that in and around the grass, out deeper with maybe a 3/4 ounce weight, 1/2 ounce weight. Works really, really well in that grass. And then when you get to that really thick grass that maybe is 18 feet deep, 15 foot deep, another really good bait is the Hack Attack 1 ounce and 1 1/4 ounce flipping jig. So when you're in more of like those largemouth natural lakes with the deep grass, flipping a 1 ounce and a 1 1/4 ounce jig in that grass is an awesome way to catch big fish. So just a few other things that I've done that, again, there's so much, it's so broad with natural lakes. There's smallmouth lakes, there's largemouth lakes, there's grass. It's so hard to bucket it all into one. And I think that's really one of the challenges that I find people face when they get onto YouTube, Randy, is because they try to figure out, okay, I want to go catch bass. Well, when you say I want to go catch bass, how to fish a jig. Well, fishing a jig on Table Rock Lake in Missouri is very different from fishing a jig on Lake Minnetonka flipping grass, or it's very different from going down over to Lake Champlain fishing in Ticonderoga fishing a jig versus fishing a jig up on the top end of the lake for smallmouth or other situations. So I think that one thing that you have to really pay attention to, guys, when you're fishing and when you're trying to learn about fishing is make sure that the information you're getting is from an angler who's fishing on the lakes in your area. A lot of times the information that I talk about in my videos, it can be applicable in a lot of situations, and you could take snippets of that to help you become a better fisherman, but a lot of times it can hurt you more than help you, because if you're learning fishing from me, who I'm fishing on Table Rock Lake, and try to replicate what I'm doing down here in the south, up north, you're not going to have near the success as if you try to find people who make videos up north, for example. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Oh, absolutely, Johnny. And and that's, I mean, it goes back, just like you said, to the personality and the characteristics of the lake that you're fishing, because every one of those northern lakes is going to have some subtle differences on it. And, and every one of those lakes also that has a mixed population of fish is going to have two different groups of fish to fish for. So, for example, if you tell somebody to, if you're at Lake Champlain, you have to make that decision. Okay, do I want to go for largemouth or do I want to go for smallmouth? And based upon, what you want to fish for, that totally determines your approach to it, and how you need to narrow your focus down to it. So, yeah, it's a different world. I mean, and I've always been a big advocate is when you're fishing up north, particularly if you're an angler that doesn't live up there, and you're going up there for a trip, that just for a fun trip, is just to go for the smallmouth, because you just don't have that opportunity to catch smallmouth like that in any other part of the country.
For sure. Well, that is awesome information. I feel like just gives a pretty good overview of those natural lakes. Again, we didn't get into near the detail that probably some people are looking for. We didn't get into every type of fishery, but hopefully that was helpful for you guys at a high level. And I do want to get into some question and answer some of the questions you guys have on the stream. And so if you're on the live chat right now, leave some questions. Just put @FishTheMoment and leave a question, and Randy and I will answer those. And this doesn't have to be just about northern lakes. It could be about literally anything about fishing. That's very important. Don't need any more questions into my marital life right now. Everything is awesome, so no worries there. But the one thing I do want to talk about real quick, guys, is actually some stuff that Randy and I are working on for fishthemoment.com. And as you guys know, Randy's been helping me make lake breakdowns for lakes all across the country, and I have not put out lake breakdowns for a couple weeks, again, due to marriage and a new house. But I just put out 5 new map breakdowns right before this live stream aired, and these map breakdowns are for a few new lakes. They're summer breakdowns. First one is for, we have a lot on here now, wow. We got Lake Norman in North Carolina. We got Greers Ferry Lake in Arkansas, a very popular and highly requested lake, especially for my YouTuber followers. Lake Gunnersville. We've actually done Lake Gunnersville lower end. And, I need to update this thumbnail. I was updating these quick. I will change it real quick. We have the mid-lake areas and the lower end areas. So, 2 different areas of lake, lower end and mid-lake. Ignore this right here. And then we also have Lake Stockton in Missouri. And so these are all areas that Randy picked out on these lakes based on his personal experience fishing out on these lakes and just experience 30 years of tournament bass fishing. And on these breakdowns, you get 4 different areas, and you get 15 spots per area for a total of 60 spots, as well as location descriptions, bait recommendations, and the conditions to fish these areas. And so we have a lot of lakes here that we're going to be adding. I'm way behind. Randy's been kicking these maps out, so once I get all these out this next week, there's going to be probably 10 or 15 more coming in the next week or so. And we have them for lakes all across the country, and we're definitely taking requests on which lakes you'd like us to break down. So always feel free to shoot an email to my email, which is johnny@fishthemoment.com. And you can also leave a message on my Facebook page @FishTheMoment, my Instagram page @FishTheMoment, or at Randy's Facebook, which is @RandyBlaukat Professional Angler, or his Instagram @BlaukatRandy. So definitely check us out on social media as well. But we're going to be doing a lot of lake breakdowns going forward. We also have a lot of interesting YouTube content coming out. Randy and I are going to be on the lake fishing together and making cool videos, as well as just trying to get out a lot of other awesome information. One thing that I am updating, actually, guys, haven't really spent as much time on it as I need to, but it's the Fish the Moment blog. And so Randy's posting blogs every single week on the Fish the Moment blog, and I'm posting things on here as well. So, for example, here is a great article from Randy dealing with high water in the spring, and he gives you some pointers on how to fish high water in the spring, which is really helpful. And then I made a blog post about 5 simple steps becoming an offshore bass fisherman. And it's kind of like a learning plan that you guys can follow, and it gives you some video recommendations based on all the videos I've made on the basics of understanding offshore fishing, learning how to read contour line maps, understanding how to read your electronics, what baits to use offshore, and then other things to check out. So there's all kinds of resources that are going to be coming on the Fish Moment blog. I have lots of blogs from Randy, again, kind of backed up, so there's a lot of content coming here. So definitely go head over to fishthemoment.com, check out the blog, check out the lake breakdowns. There's a lot of great content that's available here from me and Randy, and there's going to be a lot more coming this summer. So after all of that, let's get over some questions here. And so let's just get a question. Let's see here. A couple questions. Okay, so tuned up asking for Randy, what are your top 5 baits when fishing around grass?
Top 5 grass baits. That here again, that would have to be that would depend upon the time of the year, water clarity, and the type of lake that I'm fishing. But so can he specify that a little bit more? Or you just want me to give you 5 that I really like for that?
This is the YouTube world. You just need to give 5 that cover everything over the entire country, every season,
Okay.
every situation. Just all 5. It's the way to go.
And here again, a lot of it has to do with the depth of the grass too. But let's start with like the typical grass scenario. Let's use Sam Rayburn in Texas, for example, pre-spawn. If I'm going to be fishing pre-spawn Sam Rayburn grass, I'm going to be looking for flats, grass that is growing in that 6 to 10 foot of water and is maybe coming to within like 4 to 5 foot of the surface, 4 to 6 foot of the surface. In that particular scenario, I'm going to be fishing like a lipless crankbait. I'm going to be fishing a bladed jig. I'm going to be fishing a jerkbait, and possibly reeling a crankbait over it. As that grass, say using the Rayburn example again, as that grass gets a little bit thicker and grows closer to the surface, that's when I'm going to start, maybe pitching and flipping soft plastics or jigs in that particular grass, or maybe still trying to rip a bladed jig through the grass. Same with any of the TVA lakes. Anytime you're dealing with water visibilities that are like less than, say, 4 foot, and you've got grass that actually that is submerged within 2 to 5 feet underneath the water, a bladed jig has got to be like one of your number one baits. And I'm not talking about throwing the bladed jig out there and just reeling it in. I'm talking about throwing it out there, figuring out if the fish want it popped, humped through the grass, jigged, if they want it slow rolled, if they want it burned. And this particular technique works everywhere. It works at Lake Seminole, it works in all the Florida lakes, it works anywhere you have that grass that has that, say, 4 foot, 3 to 4 foot of depth between the grass to the top. Now, if you're dealing with clear water situation of the grass, say for example, you're dealing a little bit farther north. That's when you're wanting to generate the strikes from a visual orientation, and that's when I use the spinner baits and the jerk baits, that type of stuff that are more side oriented. So here again, a lot of that, my 5 baits would be, if I had to go back to the 5 baits, it would be a lipless crankbait, it would be a bladed jig, it would be a jerk bait, it would be a jig, and it would be some type of a non-lipless crankbait, that's some type of a lipped crankbait. That'll cover a lot of different scenarios.
Awesome. Yeah, and we did have some clarification from Tuna Bass, and he said kind of that milfoil cabbage weed, which is kind of probably more of the lakes that, again, kind of where I'm growing up. I just have a feeling that's probably what he's asking about. So with those baits, at least for me, with those, I completely agree with Randy 100% on everything he said there. I wouldn't change anything. Just for like those lakes, kind of like up in Wisconsin, my go-to baits were that hack attack jig, that sweet beaver. Another bait I throw a lot that a lot of guys don't throw down south or up north that much is the striking cutter worm. It's like this kind of boot tail, it's kind of like a speed worm, zoom speed worm, and I'll throw that a lot. We'll actually swim that through the grass. That's a great grass bait, and you can swim it through the grass, drop it in the holes. I throw that down here in Arkansas all the time, in Oklahoma on like Lake Washita, lakes like Lake Spavinaw in Oklahoma, Lake Murray, but then I also crushed them up north in Wisconsin on a bait similar to this when I was younger. So this is a great bait that a lot of guys don't throw in the grass. One great question we have here is, how does the techniques from up north apply to reservoirs down south? Because we've been talking a lot about how the techniques transfer well, don't transfer that well from down south to up north, but maybe what techniques do transfer well that maybe you've learned fishing up north that you've brought back down south that made you a better fisherman, Randy?
Well, one of the things that stands out in my mind right off the bat is the jerk bait, because like I said, I've been really good in all the northern lakes on a jerk bait, and we just went down to Lake Toho for our first Bassmaster Open in January down there, which is, a grass-filled southern lake. And I finished 18th in the tournament, fishing nothing but a jerkbait in that tournament over those deeper grass beds. So that's a real similarity. I'm going to say a jerkbait is by far the number one choice on that situation that will catch fish in both scenarios.
And what jerkbait you throwing, Randy?
That particular one was just a 110 megabass in a variety of colors. One of the things you look at as far as colors that I found, northern versus southern, is the translucent colors seem to work a lot better up north. And then when you're down south in the southern lakes, those the flatter finishes on the cloudy days and the metallic finishes on the sunny days seem to work a little bit better because a lot of the water down south, particularly when I'm talking natural lakes, you're dealing with the southeast lakes in Florida. They have a tannic look to them, sort of a blackish look, and those metallic finishes really show up well in that darker water. Even though it's clear, it's still got the dark look, even though it's clear.
And I do want to ask you some more questions about jerkbait fishing, Randy, because I, unfortunately, or maybe I need to expand my reach on jerkbait fishing, but really I only ever throw a jerkbait when it's cold. That's the only time I ever throw it. When water temperatures are below 55 degrees and I'm twitch, let sit for 3 to 8 seconds, and that's the only time I ever throw a jerkbait. And it works great for me. I catch a ton of big fish on it, but I literally take the jerkbait box out of my boat after the water temperatures hit 55 degrees. I know that's a mistake. I know that's not what I should be doing, but that's what I've always done my entire life. And so, can you give us, I have several questions. I just want to pick your brain, especially since you're working with Megabass. You have access to the best jerkbaits in the world, so you know what's going on. So, what are the situations where you throw a jerkbait, like maybe in each season? So, once that water temperature hits 55 degrees plus, maybe like that spawn to post-spawn period, what situations throw a jerkbait then?
Well, once the fish start getting off that traditional jerkbait bite, like what you're talking about. Once that water temperature starts to hit 60 degrees, they get off of that. They're not suspended in that zone to catch them on a jerkbait like they are from say November to April. And for me, the rest of the year, when I'm talking about fishing a jerkbait, once that water temperature hits 60 degrees and until it gets down below 60 degrees. So you're talking about like in a lot of parts of the country from May to uh, end of October, that period. I'm always wanting to throw the jerk bait around some type of target or object, whether it be a dock, whether it be pieces of wood, whether it be a riprap bank, because those fish will still bite a jerk bait, but they want to ambush that lure more than just like come out of nowhere and hit it suspended like they do in the wintertime. So jerk baits are really good around docks all summer and all fall. I remember one tournament we fished it was an FLW tournament on Lake Pickwick, and everybody this was a late June tournament, and the water temperature was in the 80s. It was really warm, and everybody was out on the main river ledges, and I was back in this slough throwing a square bill in stained water, and I was doing good in the tournament. I was in the top 20 going into the last day of the tournament. And I got in this one area that was full of stumps, and the water visibility was only like 6 inches deep. And I just happened to have a 110 on that I had kept rigged in the boat because I'd been catching a few off some bridge piers out on the main lake, and that's where I was throwing it. But I just picked that 110 up and started throwing it around those stumps in like 6 inches of visibility, and I caught a 5 pounder and a 4 pounder on that jerk bait in 2 foot of water, 80-degree water next to stumps, so they'll bite it all summer long.
Really, I need to be throwing a jerkbait more. That is what I'm learning from this. And I know that like Van Dam throws a jerkbait all the time. A lot of guys just throw that jerkbait a lot.
Yeah.
What would you say the difference is? I know there's a lot of different types of jerkbaits. You have your Vision 110, 110 plus, 110 plus 2. You have your Trick Dart or 80s. You have all these different jerkbaits from Megabass, the Magnum 110. When do you go to those different jerkbaits as opposed to just sticking with the regular 110? What are the applications? Because like for me, I'm thinking, if I had a Vision 110 plus 2, would it work to go on an offshore ledge and go throw a 16-foot diving jerkbait on a ledge in the middle of the summer? Or is that maybe not something that would work? I have no idea. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the water clarity and the water depth that you're fishing, and Okay, it depends on the water clarity, water depth, and the notoriety of the lake for the type of fish they have and the size of fish they have. If I have a lake that's known for bigger fish, that's when I'll do. And particularly if I'm fishing a little bit deeper, like you're talking about around the ledges or out on those deeper flats, that's when I'm using the larger jerk baits. Like the Canada, the 110 Magnum, the Edo Shiner, or even the 110 plus one. Is that lip makes a little bit bigger profile bait, so I'm using the bigger baits in you know, the deeper water when I get it down there, and the smaller baits in the shallower water when you don't want a bait that displaces a lot of water. Because if you're dealing about in say 4 foot of water or less, and that water's warm in the summertime, I've always found better that it's better if you downsize your jerkbait size a little bit more. But I think a lot of it is like it's so situational to the lake, because it's not like you can go down to Grand Lake in July and just pick up a jerkbait and catch them in the same places that you could catch them on a deep crankbait or a square bill, something like that. There's trigger mechanisms on different lure categories that just it's a reality within itself, and a lot of that is experimentation, and it's trying it just to see if it worked. No, and jerk baits outside of the pre-spawn are uncharted territory to a lot of people. But if you look at guys like Hank Cherry, uh, Keith Combs, uh, Kelly J, a lot of the guys that just they throw jerk baits all year long, even in the summertime of the year. They don't talk about it a lot. Van Dam, even Van Dam won the classic in the middle of the summer. Up on the what river was it? The Ohio,
The Pittsburgh, the Three Rivers in
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I can't remember what's the river, but yeah, it looks like a minnow. Bass fight minnows all year long, so I think people would do well to throw them more.
That's so interesting, and it makes sense that jerkbait would be good. I guess if you always look at tournaments, I can't think of any tournaments past March that have been won on like a reservoir, or like not that one example of KVD in Pittsburgh, but there's like very few situations I remember a jerkbait even being a player in the top 10 down south past March.
Yeah.
Maybe there's one tournament, I think Brett Ayler was doing really well in Sam Rayburn Lake one year in the post spawn throwing a jerkbait, and I have caught him in the post spawn and jerkbait a little bit, but after that, like, it just doesn't seem like it's never been that big of a player. But not only am I been thinking, like, on Table Rock, I catch a lot of fish suspended over 15, 20 foot of water over trees in the middle of the summer. Why not go throw a Vision 110 plus or 1 or plus 2 where I'm throwing the swim baits over those deep trees? I'm sure it would catch fish just as well as the swim baits or a hair jig or wherever I'm throwing these different baits. I've just never done it, so I think it's something interesting to try.
Well, it's just trying it, because I remember, and you're familiar with Lake Dardanelle a lot, John. You fished down there a lot, but a friend of mine, we fished and it was back when they were the old Redman tournaments, or the BFLs now. But he got on a deal where he finished like in the top 5 in the tournament. He caught him on a shallow billed rogue jerkbait chartreuse around the boat docks on Dardanelle in the middle of the summer. It was like a July tournament. So he came within a pound or so of winning on a jerkbait on a muddy river in the middle of summer. So it's you just never know.
That's crazy, because I fished Dardanelle more than any lake in the whole country, and I've never caught a fish off a boat dock on Lake Dardanelle before in my life. And now I'm rethinking all of my decisions for the last 10 years fishing Lake Dardanelle. This is crazy. And that just goes to show you guys, there are so many baits that if you use them out of context on a lake where no one else is throwing that bait, a lot of times it can generate a lot of strikes just because the fish aren't used to seeing that presentation. And I'm sure that if you go through Tackle Warehouse, there's a bait that you can pick up right now, go to your lake, and just wear them out right now because no one else is throwing it. It's some off-the-wall bait that you'd never expect to work, but when you go do it, you catch fish on it. One example, I've talked to Randy about this before, but is like one of those hair jigs you throw in the Tennessee River. I was catching 3 and 4 pound smallmouth in May and June on Table Rock Lake, fishing a hair jig in 40 foot of water out there, crushing them, and no one was fishing a hair jig out there. I've never really heard of anyone doing it that time of year or really at all in my area of the country, but it worked really well, and that's like one of those little secret deals that I've figured out. So that's something that's really important to just try is to experiment, try different baits, try different techniques in weird times of year, weird situations. Most of the time it doesn't work, but when it does work, it's really, really, really good. So cool. One question I keep seeing here that's popping up. PK bumped it, and let's see here. I'm trying to figure out who asked it. Someone asked about trying to fish on the when there's moss covering the bottom of the lake. I don't remember who asked that. I apologize. I'm trying to go through the chat, but someone said that they want to know how to fish when there's slimy moss all over the bottom of the lake. And this is something that happens a lot actually on even like a table rock lake or places like that where you'll get moss and slime that gets all over the rocks, the shallow docks, the grass. And what I find is whenever I get those mossy, slimy conditions, there's always going to be a place on that lake where there is no moss or no slime growing. Whether that's out in the middle of the lake, whether that's up in a shallow cove, a new section of the lake, wherever it is. Usually, if that lake is big enough where you can move around a little bit, the entire lake won't be slimed up. And so finding those areas where the slime is not present and where you can actually get a clean cast is super key. And usually when you can find those areas, you're going to catch a lot of fish. Finding them is very difficult a lot of times, but that's always been what I found, especially if you're trying to fish on the bottom. Or you can just ignore the slime and just fish baits that are suspended off the bottom. Spinner baits, jerk baits like we talked about, maybe a swim bait or a spy bait over the moss, over the slime, and you don't actually have to dredge it up. So either fish above the slime or find the clean spots, which seems pretty straightforward, but sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. Any advice there, Randy?
Yeah, I agree with all that, Johnny. We have a lot of slime on the Missouri lakes right now. I was just up at Stockton a couple days ago, and the bottom's covered with slime. The bushes are covered with slime. I don't really understand why it's so thick right now, but the fish will still use it. It's just like you can still catch fish in and around that. It's a hassle, and like you said, you just have to sort of fish baits that are a little bit more efficient around it. And but it's sort of a pain you have to deal with it time to time of the year.
Let's see here, a couple more questions. Chris Whalen's asking, how important are bait colors for clear water smallmouth and natural lakes? Are the lure colors really important for you, Randy? Or I've seen people throw like bright chartreuse baits, white baits, natural color baits, perch color baits. It seems like it's all over the spectrum.
Oh, I can tell you right now that color, in my opinion, I mean, once you get dialed into the lure category and the profile that the fish want, color is absolutely critical for northern water smallmouth. They're side oriented. And the thing about color, that it changes day to day, it changes even hour to hour based upon time of day, angle of the sun, wind direction, just so many different factors, how the clouds can roll in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it changes the light intensity a little bit. So keying in on that colors is so critical. And everybody, when they start catching a few fish on the color, you automatically builds confidence and you start saying, oh, this is the one they want, they're going to bite that. And that's not true. They're always biting a lot of different colors. The key is just finding the ones that are getting the bigger bites and finding the ones that the bass are really eating well as far as getting the whole bait in their mouth. And, that'll tell you, which ones you got the right ones. But yeah, you can't ever underestimate the importance of color in northern smallmouth. That's why it's a really good idea when you're fishing hard baits like topwaters, jerk baits, crank baits, to have a combination of clear-sided baits, metallic finishes, and flat finishes, and sort of rotate that up. And another thing that I found out about northern water, clear water smallmouth is right off the bat in the morning, and when you roll through your first area, that's when you want to throw the loudest colors, like the pearls or the chartreuses, because that's going to get the biggest, most aggressive smallmouth in that area. And then you can come back through that water with the more subtle, subdued, natural hues and pick up more fish as the day wears on.
Awesome. That's perfect. That's really good information there, Randy. So one last question here. It's not really related to fishing as much as kind of about the YouTube channel. It's Robert Turner's asking, what do you have coming up on your channel? Have you stopped with the pool videos? So I've not stopped with the pool videos. The pool has been closed because of all of the stuff going on in the world. But I actually have been able to book the pool here for the first weekend of June. So I'm going to be starting up the pool videos, doing a lot of offshore lure testing in that Olympic swimming pool so I can test out bait on a long cast in 13 foot of water. We're going to be testing, I already just ordered fishing lures literally today. I'm going to be testing some 10-inch worms, Magnum shaky heads, Ned rigs. I'm going to be trying some like Magnum drop shotting, all kinds of techniques we're going to test out in that pool, guys. So we're going to keep those videos coming. I already have a video that I'm working on that I tried to get out this last week, was not able to because of moving into a new house and getting married. And the plan is to get that out this Friday, and it's about how to find hidden offshore areas on your lake. I'm digging into contour line maps and digging into electronic stuff like that. So that's a great video coming up. And then I have a lot of video content coming up with Randy. We're going to be making YouTube videos together. Also going to be making some kayak fishing content when I get out with Chad Hoover this weekend. We're going to do some kayak fishing. I have more electronics videos I have in the queue that I need to edit, as well as a lot more on the water content, but offshore fishing, everything like that. So tons of content coming to the channel. I know the last 2 videos have been live streams, just because I've kind of explained this to people. The live streams take about 2 hours to produce, which is basically the time that me and Randy sit here talking to you guys, versus my YouTube videos takes usually 8 hours on the lake to film, plus another 8 to 10 hours to edit. So it's a 20-hour-a-week investment to make one video. So a lot of times they make 2 videos a week. It's taking me 40 hours, and that's a lot of time. So my normal YouTube videos take a lot of time. These live streams are a great way to get content out that's really useful, but also saves me all the editing time. So lots of content coming up, and really excited to continue to do these live streams with Randy here. He's going to be on the channel a lot more and going to be giving us a lot of great information. He's already been super informative so far, and he's shared so much just in this stream alone that you guys should be excited for stuff coming up. Anything else to share, Randy, before we sign off?
Well, just talking, like I said, about the northern lakes, the whole subject we're talking about, northern versus southern. It's like, just don't get intimidated by it, because bass is a bass everywhere they go. The things that make them generate strikes are the same. It's the same impulses, the same instincts, and it's just a matter of going through a little bit of a learning curve. And another thing that I'll leave everybody with the tip on fishing northern lakes is northern lakes are not pattern lakes. They're generally area lakes, spot lakes. So when you get into an area that you're getting a few bites in, you really have to milk that area to the maximum level. It can be as big as a football field, or it could be as big as 10 football fields. But once you get a few bites, try to maximize that water by approaching it with different angles, different lure selections. Just basically get in there and just figure out the fish in that area. Don't try to pattern a natural lake, because the more that you run around in a natural lake, the less successful you're going to be.
Awesome. That's a great thought to leave us with. And I want to thank PK Clark for the $5 super chat on the live stream. Really appreciate that, PK. And just want to remind everyone to go over to fishmoment.com and check out some of the lake breakdowns that Randy has put together for the website. This week we added 5 more map breakdowns. We have Lake Norman, North Carolina, Greers Ferry Lake in Arkansas, Lake Gunnersville lower end for the summertime. We also have Lake Gunnersville Mid-Lake, which I will update right after the stream. This is the Mid-Lake map. I just have the wrong thumbnail here. And then Lake Stockton in Missouri, summertime. So check out those map breakdowns if you're interested. I also going to be making some new free bait guides. They're coming to the website. Posting blogs from Randy about fishing. I'll also be putting some blogs up myself and just some articles for you guys to read, and just a lot of our great content. So thanks everyone for checking out the live stream. And if you do like the live streams and maybe you aren't able to catch them live, or maybe you don't have time to sit down on Tuesday night and listen to them for 2 hours, you can download this live stream on the Apple Podcast app or on the Spotify app just by going to the Fish the Moment podcast. Just go type in Fish the Moment podcast. You can even do this on Google, and you'll find it in the Apple Store, and you also find it on Spotify, and you can listen to me and Randy talk about everything we discuss here while you're driving to the lake, when you're getting ready for work in the morning, while you're at work. I don't know if that's allowed at your work, but do it anyways because it helps out me and Randy. And one thing we're really trying to do is try to get more people listen to the podcast, the more downloads we can get on the podcast, the more we can do with the podcast, the more we can produce it and try to improve it. We could even be doing this multiple times a week if we get enough people watching and listening to the podcast. So definitely go to the podcast app, start downloading the podcast. Even if you don't listen to it, just go on the podcast app and start subscribing to it. If you subscribe to the podcast, you automatically download it. We get the download. It helps us for our analytics. It helps us reach out to sponsors, things like that, to then grow it, and you guys get the whole deal there. So definitely subscribe, leave a review on the podcast app. Helps us out a ton. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for joining the stream. For all the 180 people who are still on the stream, which is awesome. Thank you. Any last words, Randy, before we sign off?
Yeah, we just, like I said, we appreciate everybody tuning in. Like I said, I'm really enjoying, this format to share the information. I love talking fishing, and if, like you said, if anybody out there's got questions, comments on things you'd like us to cover or talk about, just feel free to drop a comment, and that's what we're here for. We'll address those questions and just try to get everybody to catch a few more fish out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Randy, for joining me this week. He'll be back again for the next live stream. And other than that, I hope you guys have great luck on the water and stay safe out there. And we'll see y'all in a couple weeks or maybe next week. Thanks, guys.